Every job has its pros and cons, even those annoying customer service jobs that you probably had as a teenager, where the only pro was making just enough money to afford the gas that got you to the job, and maybe your lunch. Being a UX designer also has its pros and cons, and we'll just start with the pros. The first pro is impact because you could feel how your design positively contributes to the outcome of a product people will use to accomplish their goals. After all, UX design is the foundation of creating something that doesn't make you want to rip your hair out. And I explain in my UX Design 101 video why UX design is important. And yes, I am the hair expert. Another pro is that it pays well, especially once you get past junior level. You won't find too many junior level roles under 50K per year, mid level roles under 75K per year, or senior level roles under 100K per year. And if you're lucky enough to get into one of the really reputable tech companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, etc., you're significantly more likely to make north of 150K per year. A third pro is that UX design can be done almost completely in your undies. Now, I say almost because you will have video meetings, but you might not even have to turn your camera on, depending on the company that you work for. UX design could be done pretty much anywhere with an internet connection as long as you have the proper hardware and software to crank out your deliverables. I'm sure there are more pros, but those are the three that came to mind when I wrote this, so let's move on to the cons. Like most roles in tech, your schedule as a UX designer can get dominated by project team video chats where staying awake sometimes requires every ounce of strength. These are better known as meetings. Some days you can get stuck in back-to-back-to-back meetings all day, which can make finding time for actual design work tricky, and this only gets worse as you move up in seniority and grow out of being just a pair of production hands into being more of a consultant. Speaking of consultant, as a UX designer, you're always on call to answer UX questions from team members who will contact you via email, direct message, or some other way. This can lead you down a rabbit hole as you type paragraphs of explanations explaining functionality that is unclear, or it can lead you to being pulled into impromptu meetings that can last literally hours. Now, oversight is an acceptable part of any tech job, but after a while you'll grow tired of answering the same questions over and over again. Another con is that some deliverables aren't particularly exciting, and for me that would be functional annotations documents or functional requirements documents where you're essentially creating maps of interaction points of screens that are already designed. And what makes that a con is that it's a lot more like busy work than actual design. So there's a caveat to this next one, which is that UX design might not be as creatively fulfilling as you think it will be. If you're coming from backgrounds in art or graphic design or similar, then your desire to get your hands dirty in visuals might not be satisfied in a pure UX designer role. Now, if you're going to be more of a product designer or a UI UX designer, then you could disregard what I'm saying because you'll likely be a lot more involved in the visuals of the final product. The last con I have on my list is unemployment because this is definitely one of the more annoying fields to job hunt in. You remember the customer service job I mentioned at the beginning of the video? It's likely that getting that job only required you to fill out an application, wait for a call from the manager, and then come in for one or two interviews that are simply to determine if you function well enough to tie your own shoes and that you're not a psycho. Yeah, well, there's a lot more to getting a job in UX. You need a resume, a portfolio that you've hopefully kept up to date, and time to go through an interview process that could last weeks or even months before you get rejected for a single tiny flaw because this is an industry where companies are looking for unicorns. And only about half of those companies that reject you will give you a reason for their rejection, and only about half of the companies that actually give you a reason for rejecting you will give you a useful reason for rejecting you. Thank you for your interest in the UX designer position. While we were impressed with your background, we decided to move forward with candidates who more closely resemble what we need at the moment. Despite the fact that you check literally every box based on what we wrote in our job description. It's important to note that just because I have 5 cons and only 3 pros doesn't mean that the cons necessarily outweigh the pros. How you weigh the pros versus the cons really depends on how you, the aspiring UX designer, weigh each individual pro and con. Now, if for whatever reason you are craving a more in-depth video on the cons, I created a video titled The Dark Side of Being a UX Designer, which I will link both at the top here in the card and in the description.